The wine glass shattered against the wall before I even realized she'd thrown it. God damn it, Sophia! I roared, ducking as red wine splattered across the marble floor like blood. Don't Sophia me, Lucas, she screamed back, her voice shaking the windows. You don't own me. You don't get to tell me what to wear or where to go. Her eyes burned like a fuse ready to blow. She stood in front of me wearing a silver dress that looked more like a weapon than clothing, backless, sleeveless, and with a slit that made my blood boil. I clenched my jaw. You're not stepping out of this house dressed like that. Oh, really? She sneered. What are you gonna do, lock me up? Beat me? You think being a husband gives you the right to control me like a dog? My fists tightened. You can call it whatever you want, but as long as you're married to me, you'll respect this home. She laughed, that bitter, sarcastic laugh that cuts a man deeper than a knife. Respect? You. Don't make me laugh, Lucas. You haven't been a man in this marriage for years. That one hit hard. My voice dropped. What did you just say? She stepped closer, eyes glinting with hate. You heard me. You strut around acting like some mighty provider, but let's be honest, you're a coward hiding behind your bank account. You think money makes you a man? It doesn't. You can't even satisfy your own wife. Watch your mouth, Sophia, I said through my teeth. Before you say something you'll regret. Oh, please, she spat. Regret? The only regret I have is wasting my best years on a weak man who thinks control is love. The air turned heavy. My pulse hammered in my ears. You've had too much to drink. I haven't had enough, she snapped. Maybe if you'd been half the man Donald is, I wouldn't have to go find what I need elsewhere. The name hit me like a slap. I took a slow step forward, my voice trembling with controlled fury. Donald? What the hell does he have to do with this? Her lips twitched, her pride fighting with guilt, but rage won. You really want to know? She said, breathing hard. Fine, Lucas. You want the truth. You're not man enough to handle it. Try me. I barked. She drew closer until I could feel her breath. Her eyes were wet but wild, and when she spoke, the words tore through me like claws. I'm pregnant, Lucas, she hissed. I froze. Then she smiled, that cruel, broken smile that only the guilty can wear. I'm pregnant for your friend, Donald. Do your worst. The room spun. My body went numb. I didn't feel the tears or the trembling, just a ringing in my head like a bomb had gone off. For a moment, I thought she was lying. She had to be. But the satisfaction in her eyes, the quiet dare in her smirk, told me it was true. You're lying, I whispered. She shook her head slowly. I wish I was. But I'm done pretending, Lucas. Donald made me feel what you never could. He made me want again. I staggered back, chest burning. Donald? The same Donald I pulled out of the gutter. The man who begged me for a chance. The one I fed, clothed, and trusted. Her silence was confirmation enough. I pressed a hand to my face, breathing hard. You brought shame into my house, Sophia. Into our bed. She folded her arms. Maybe if there'd been something left in that bed worth saving, I wouldn't have looked elsewhere. And that was it. That was the night I stopped being her husband, and started becoming her lesson. It's crazy how your brain refuses to let go of certain memories, even the ones that later break you. The night Sophia confessed she was pregnant for Donald should have wiped away every trace of affection I ever had for her. But somehow, my mind kept looping back to the beginning. To when everything looked perfect. I met Sophia at a charity gala in downtown Manhattan, one of those high-end events where champagne is cheap but everyone acts like they're saving the world. I was 29, fresh off a business deal that finally took my logistics company out of the shadows. She was 24, radiant, sharp, full of confidence that didn't need permission. I'd been watching her for maybe 3 minutes before she turned, caught me, and smiled. "You can come say hi, you know," she said. "It's less creepy that way." I laughed, a little embarrassed. "Fair enough. Hi. I'm Lucas." That was the beginning. Coffee the next day turned into dinner the next week, and before I knew it, she'd taken up residence in my thoughts. Sophia wasn't just beautiful, she was magnetic. She had that New York energy that could make even silence sound interesting. I thought she loved me because of who I was, not what I had. And for a while, maybe that was true. A year later, we got married in a private ceremony overlooking the Hudson River, surrounded by family, friends, and photographers desperate for perfect shots of what would later become the biggest lie of my life. And then came Donald. Donald and I went way back, high school in Brooklyn. We were the dreamers of the class. I took my shot and made it big, he took his and hit every wall on the way down. The last time I saw him before our reunion, he was hustling part-time gigs and sleeping on a cousin's couch in Queens. When I ran into him again 8 years later, he was thinner, rough around the edges, but that same old charm was still there. "Lucas, man, you look like you own half of New York," he said, smiling wide. I laughed and hugged him. "I'm just surviving, bro. What about you?" He told me about the bad luck, the layoffs, the failed relationships. He didn't complain, but I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. I saw a man drowning quietly, and I decided to throw him a rope. I gave him a job at my company, started him off small, but made sure he could breathe again. Helped him find a decent apartment in Brooklyn Heights, even gave him one of my old cars. He cried when I handed him the keys. Said, "You don't know what this means, man." I did. Because once upon a time, I was him. A week later, I introduced him to Sophia. She came downstairs in jeans and a white shirt, her hair tied up, looking effortlessly gorgeous. "Babe, meet Donald, my old friend from high school," I said. Donald froze for half a second. "Wow. You weren't kidding when you said your wife was beautiful." Sophia laughed softly. "Careful, Donald. Flattery might just get you another invite." We all laughed. But even then, I noticed something in the way Donald looked at her, admiration that lasted a beat too long. I brushed it off. I mean, who wouldn't look twice at Sophia? Weeks passed. Donald proved himself at work, loyal, hardworking, grateful. He became like family. He'd come over for dinner sometimes, help me with side projects, hang out on weekends. I loved having him around. But Sophia. She started changing. She'd suddenly ask me, "Hey, is Donald joining us tonight?" or wear a little more makeup on the nights he came over. I noticed, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. I remember one night, I walked into the living room and found her on the couch, laughing quietly on her phone. When I asked who she was talking to, she said, "Just a friend." I didn't push. I trusted her. God, I trusted her. They say love makes you blind, but I think it's worse than that. Love makes you willfully blind. It makes you see the cracks and call them shadows. It makes you hear the lies and rename them jokes. I should have known. I should have noticed how Donald's confidence grew, how Sophia's warmth toward me started to fade. I should have paid attention when her phone started living face down on the table. But I didn't. Because in my mind, betrayal was something that happened to other men, not me. Not in my home. Not with my friend. If only I'd known what was coming. If only I'd known that the same man I lifted from rock bottom would one day help bury me alive. Looking back now, I realize that betrayals don't start with big things. They start with small moments, missed eye contact, short answers, fake smiles. The kind of moments you brush off because you don't want to believe your heart is lying to you. After Donald joined my company, everything seemed perfect. Business was booming. Our lives in New York were comfortable. I had the woman I loved, a thriving company, and a best friend who finally seemed to be getting his life together. But then, little things started to shift. Sophia began sleeping late. At first, I thought it was insomnia. She'd sit on the couch, scrolling through her phone, pretending to watch TV. Sometimes I'd wake up at 2 a.m. and hear the faint sound of her laughter coming from downstairs, soft, low, secretive. When I asked who she was texting, she'd smile lazily and say, "Just the girls." But I never heard her friends laugh like that. One Friday night, I came home early from work. Donald had stayed behind to finish up some reports for me. I opened the door quietly, hoping to surprise Sophia. She was on the phone again. I caught her saying, "No, don't say that, you'll make me blush." My heart sank a little. When she saw me, she jumped slightly and fumbled to end the call. "Hey, babe. You're home early. Who was that?" I asked. She smiled, too quickly. "My cousin. You remember Michelle?" "Yeah," I said. "Didn't know Michelle makes you blush." Her smile froze for a second before she changed the topic. I let it go. I shouldn't have. The following week, I started noticing Donald's attitude changing. He used to greet me with genuine respect, "Morning, boss." Now it was more like, "What's up, man?" Friendly, casual, but too casual. He started dressing sharper, too. New cologne, tailored shirts, even started working out. I was happy for him, until I noticed Sophia complimenting him one afternoon when he stopped by our house to drop some documents. "Wow, Donald," she said, smiling. "You've been hitting the gym, huh?" Donald laughed. "Trying to keep up with Lucas." I laughed too, but something about that moment didn't sit right. There was an energy there. A spark I wasn't supposed to see. Weeks passed, and the distance between Sophia and I grew like a crack in glass, silent at first, then spreading until everything fragile began to break. She stopped kissing me goodnight. Stopped talking about her day. Started saying she was too tired more often. I'd wake up and she'd already be out running errands. I'd come home and she'd be gone. Her perfume would linger, but her warmth wouldn't. Then came the night that finally made my instincts scream. Donald and I were supposed to meet at a restaurant in Midtown for a client dinner. He called an hour before, saying he wasn't feeling well. I decided to swing by his apartment to drop off some documents he needed. It was around 9:30 p.m. when I got there. His car was parked outside. I went up the stairs and knocked. No answer. I almost turned to leave, until I heard something. Laughter. Soft, familiar laughter. Sophia's laughter. My stomach twisted. I pressed my ear to the door, heart pounding like thunder. I couldn't hear words, but I heard voices. Hers. His. And then, silence. The kind of silence that only follows something you shouldn't be hearing. I froze there for almost a full minute, praying I was wrong. Maybe she came to visit him about something. Maybe it was a coincidence. But deep down, I knew. I didn't knock again. I didn't call out. I just walked back down those stairs, one slow, heavy step at a time. That was the night I stopped being sure of anything. From that day, I started watching, quietly. I began noticing the extra care she took before leaving the house. The way she smiled at her phone. The sudden work trips Donald had to take that always lined up with her girls' weekends. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Because I needed proof. And when you're calm in your suspicion, that's when your revenge begins to plan itself. I had a rule in my head, a small, ridiculous law I told myself to keep the edges of our lives smooth, no wild nights out during the week. Work was what paid for this life, the mortgage, the dinners, the little luxuries that kept Sophia soft and happy. It had always seemed reasonable. So when she stood in our bedroom that Thursday evening, silver dressed like a dare, and said she was going to Kendra's birthday party at a club in Midtown, I said no. Not tonight, I told her plainly. You're not going. She stared at me like I'd told her she had to move continents. Her lip curled. You're joking. No, I said. I am not joking. You've been out too much. We have responsibilities. Responsibilities, she spat, stepping closer until she invaded my space. Don't use that word to cage me. I felt my voice sharpen. This isn't about control, Sophia. It's about respect. If you want to go out, tell me honestly, don't dress like you're going to bait trouble. That's an ugly word, she snapped. Bait. You think I'm bait now? I could feel the room compressing, our words like quicksilver cutting through the air. She raised her chin. You're pathetic, Lucas. You hide behind money because you don't know how to be a real man. You're weak. That was the line. That was the blow that made hot rage crawl beneath my skin. Don't dare, I warned. Say that again. Say what? She said, turning on me, eyes lit with something feral. That you're less of a man. That you bought friends and they repay you by fucking your life. At least Donald had the courage to want something real. She was saying things then she didn't even seem embarrassed of, like ceremonial knives pulled straight from her mouth. The tone was no longer an argument, it was a declaration. Who do you think you are? I felt something inside me crack, the part that had always forgiven and made allowances. You will not say his name to me like that. Her face changed then, not flinching, not retreating, but sharpening as if the final syllables were an offering. I'm pregnant, she said, low and hard. For Donald. The words landed like an explosion. I think the wine glass she'd been gripping fell from her hand and hit the floor. No, she had thrown it during the fight earlier, that detail blurred in the white noise of that moment. What I remember most clearly was the strangeness of her smile when she finished, equal parts triumph and pity. Do your worst, she sneered. Do whatever you want. I don't care. She expected to see me crumble. She expected to watch me collapse under shame or to beg. Instead, something colder than hurt took hold. I had suspected. I had reasons to suspect. Late calls, messages deleted too quickly, Donald's sudden presence in ways that felt staged rather than friendly. But I'd kept those suspicions at bay because love is a stubborn liar. After she left the room, heels knocking like a drum roll down the hallway, I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I started breathing, slow, like a man training himself not to drown. Then I turned to the only place that held the truth, her phone. I hadn't looked at it before. I wasn't a burglar, I was a husband with a broken heart. But the night she told me to do my worst, she gave me permission. The permission I had been aching for, if a man can be that cruelly honest about it. Donald's name blinked on the screen. So did messages, thick with secrets, shrill with want. I tapped the thread and the photos came like shrapnel, morning light on sheets, the curve of her back under his hand, the angle of a kiss that belonged to our bed. A voice memo I had never planned to hear played, his laugh, her breath, both of them careless, intimate. And then an attachment, a photo of a pregnancy test, certain enough to ruin the world. My stomach fell out from under me. The proof I had gathered in my head, the gnawing worry I had walked around with for months, now had teeth. The digital evidence matched her confession and made it a fact I could hold, catalog, and use. There was no screaming that night. No dramatic scene of smashing plates or public confrontation. Not because I lacked fury, but because fury felt amateur beside the machinery of ruin I could build. I'd always believed there was an art to consequences. If she wanted to dare me, if she wanted to sleep in the bed she'd soiled, I would respond with a precision that would ensure the pain lasted far longer than a single fit. I made a list in my head while she talked to friends downstairs, oblivious. First, documentation. Everything saved, backed up, time-stamped. Screenshots, originals, cloud copies. Second, financial audit. Donald's payroll, his deposits, suspicious transfers. Third, legal counsel. Fourth, insulation, make sure this move would not blow back at my company or my name. Fifth, timing. The right moment to pull all threads at once so the noose tightens evenly. When she strolled back upstairs at midnight, eyes glossed and hair windblown and still wearing that insolent smile, I greeted her at the top of the stairs like a man offering a handshake to a rival. "You're home early," she said, surprised, like I had failed to perform the breakdown she had expected. "Yes," I said softly. "I'm home." And behind that soft syllable, a storm I'd built with patience began to take shape. I had the confirmation. I had the confession. The rest would be the slow, clinical business of ensuring that when the fallout came, it landed where I intended, on the man who betrayed his brother, and on the woman who threw our life away like it was a party favor. There's a terrible discipline to revenge when you do it right. It requires the patience of a taxman and the ruthlessness of a surgeon, careful incisions, steady hands, no theatrics. I learned that the hard way the night Sophia told me to do my worst. I had proof, all that remained was the slow, exact work of turning proof into consequence. I started with paper. That sounds almost quaint now, paper, bank statements, invoices, but the rot at the heart of what Donald and Sophia had done was economic. They hadn't simply betrayed me in bed, they'd been siphoning pieces of the life I'd built. Donald had been clever enough to hide it in small morsels, clever enough to think I'd never notice. He had not expected me to light every corner with the flashlight of a man who had already had his world burned. The first call was to Mara, my lawyer. Calm, efficient, and the kind of woman who made people tell her truths even when they didn't want to. I walked into her office without the theatrical fury I'd wanted to broadcast. I wanted control. Fury would have been a clumsy weapon. "Document everything," she said, not lifting her eyes from the file she'd already opened. "Screenshots, originals, timestamps. Don't delete a thing. Next, we get a forensic accountant in. If there's money moving where it shouldn't, you want it traced." I hired Henry Klein, a forensic accountant with a reputation for finding skeletons in corporate closets. He arrived in a suit that never wrinkled and with a laptop full of curiosity. Over the next week, Henry and his team excavated our company's records like archaeologists at a ruin. It didn't take long. Small transfers here, invoice padding there. A vendor who only existed on paper. Ghost payments routed through shell companies, then filtered back into an account linked to someone who theatrically claimed he worked for me. The pattern was amateur but effective, dozens of tiny withdrawals that added up to a worrying total. Donald had been taking from the company that fed him. I felt sick, but I also felt a cold clarity. The personal hurt would not be enough, the legal cut would be. I needed a prosecutor, someone who didn't care about feelings, only about statutes. Mara made the introductions. By the end of the week, I found myself sitting across a gray-faced assistant district attorney who smelled of tile cleaner and the absolute certainty of a person who'd chosen one line of work and stuck to it. "We will need a convincing paper trail," she said when I laid the files in front of her. "Emails, signed documents, bank routing numbers. Anything that connects Donald to funds outside of payroll." I gave her everything. The screenshots. The message threads. The copies of invoices. I watched as a stack of evidence that had been a knife in my gut became, in her hands, a file that could take a life apart. It was a strange sensation, violent, efficient, almost mechanical. My personal collapse was becoming an instrument of justice. But evidence only goes so far when you're dealing with someone who knows how to duck under the radar. You need witnesses. You need admissions. You need the kind of human mistake that can't be corrected by a change of account number or a lawyer's memo. That's where patience showed its ugly face. I had to wait for Donald to be careless, for him to keep living the way someone who thinks themselves above consequence lives, spending, smiling, assuming the world would always fold for them. And because he was the kind of man who couldn't resist showing off, he obliged. A month into the audit he made his first mistake. He ordered an expensive piece of equipment for client demonstrations and charged it to a vendor I knew nothing about. Henry traced the vendor to a shell company, notarized in a name I recognized, Donald's girlfriend from college, the one I'd watched him call on nights he pretended to be working late. He'd forgotten to mask the trail through her account. It was like finding a match to an unlit fuse. It only took one spark. With the DA's team on the case, warrants were drafted. We coordinated with the bank to freeze the ghost accounts. They moved quickly, but not without procedure, the kind of unromantic bureaucracy that would ruin two people's lives in a way that left no room for drama, only for paperwork and the iron music of handcuffs. The arrest itself was clinical. I remember standing outside the corporate office on a Wednesday morning, the city's noise happening around us as if everything were normal. Black SUVs, suited men, the DA reading rights in a voice that belonged in a movie. Donald's face when they cuffed him was not the broken man I remembered from school, it was rage and disbelief and the sudden panic of a man who realized he'd gambled with something he didn't own and lost. He looked at me then, not with the remorse I might have expected, but with the raw, animal accusation of someone betrayed in his own way. I felt nothing for a long minute but the bitter, clean satisfaction that justice, or at least the nearest approximation of it, was moving. The charges were heavy: embezzlement, wire fraud, conspiracy. The DA moved with patience and muscle. The evidence piled up and was turned into a legal story so airtight the judge didn't hesitate. Donald's trial was a media non-event. We had little interest in spectacle. We wanted the system to do what it was designed for, punish transgression with proportional force. The sentence was severe, 10 years. When the gavel fell, I felt a strange emptiness that had nothing to do with triumph and everything to do with the acknowledgement that I had helped imprison a man I used to call brother. But the legal hammer wasn't the only lever I pulled. I had Sophia's access to the house and the accounts revoked. Not vindicatively, but out of necessity. I changed passwords, moved funds, and, as quietly as possible, began the process of disentangling our lives. Mara warned me about appearing cruel, that you don't want to be the man who looks like he's enjoying the wreckage. I nodded, but there was no pretending I didn't feel better when she tried to swipe her credit card and found it declined, when her favorite salon sent a polite note about suspended billing. The tiny humiliations were not for amusement so much as examples. This is real loss, this is the consequence of your choices. She came to me in the days after Donald's arrest, eyes hollowed by something that resembled regret. "Lucas," she said one morning, standing in the kitchen where weeks before she had arranged flowers with a practiced hand. "We can fix this. Fix this." The absurdity of the words made me inhale slowly. Fix what, Sophia? The lie? The betrayal? The theft? She flinched. I made a mistake. More than one, I said. You slept with the man I rescued and then helped him steal from the company we both benefited from. She began to weep, not the sharp, dramatic tears of guilt, but the slow, practical kind of grief people reserve for losses of comfort. I didn't mean. Save it, I said. You'll have to go through courts, and then you'll go through life rebuilding with whatever dignity remains. I gave her a list: therapists, divorce attorneys, a schedule for returning company property. It was businesslike. It was cold. It was necessary. In the weeks that followed, her facade of confidence crumbled. The house I had bought us felt too large for one person. The photographs of happier times seemed to glow with a cruel irony. She was forced to move into a small apartment, sell the car I once gave her as a sign of my love, and begin the slow, grinding work of finding employment that could sustain her now empty lifestyle. I watched her shrink in a way I had never wanted to see. I do not tell this as a celebration. People like to imagine revenge as a wine you drink and then sleep like a man cleansed. That is a lie. What I won cost me pieces of myself I had not expected to lose. The house felt quieter, the nights felt longer. Sometimes, when the city buzzed on without me, I missed her voice, her laugh, the way she once said my name like an incantation. But forgiveness and forgetfulness are different things. I had traded an illusion for truth, and the price was loneliness wrapped in righteousness. Donald's conviction came and went like an unavoidable storm. 10 years is a long time in a man's life. It is also a sentence that leaves family members and reputations trailing like seaweed. I thought of the boy I once dragged from the gutters of Brooklyn and how life had spun him into this. I thought of choices, of the little moments that become a rope. In the quiet after the legal machinery ground and the dust began to settle, I stood in the doorway of our empty bedroom, the sheets folded, the scent of lavender faint and ordinary. The revenge had worked, their lives were unmade, and in the particular, efficient way of compensated pain, I had regained what they had taken. In the more personal calculus of the heart, the accounting was not so clean. I had taken back the house, the company had been secured, Donald was behind bars. Sophia was gone. What remained was a man who had been broken and then rebuilt with tools that cost more than money. I had my victory, but I would spend the rest of my life paying for it in a ledger only I could see, line items of trust, of laughter, of the small domestic kindnesses that once felt eternal. Revenge had been surgical, yes. But surgery scars. And where the incision healed, a new skin formed, thinner, harder, and forever wary. 3 years have passed. I measure time differently now, not in hours or business deals, but in silences. The kind that sit heavy in the chest when the city outside keeps living as if nothing happened. The empire I built is stronger than ever. New contracts, new clients, new faces who look at me with the same mixture of fear and admiration. They call me Mr. Lucas now, not Lucas. Success has a way of making people forget your humanity, and I let them. It's easier that way. But success doesn't talk back to you at night. It doesn't laugh in the kitchen. It doesn't wear your hoodie when it's cold. Those small, human things died the same night Sophia told me, "I'm pregnant for your friend, Donald, do your worst." And I did. God knows I did. It was a rainy Tuesday when I saw her again. I had left my office late, the streets slick with reflected neon. The kind of night that smells of gasoline and heartbreak. I stopped at a small 24-hour diner in Brooklyn, one of those places where the coffee tastes burnt but the quiet feels safe. Then I saw her. Sophia. She was behind the counter, wearing a pale blue waitress uniform that didn't fit the woman I used to know. Her hair was shorter now, her makeup gone. She looked smaller, not physically, but in spirit, like the world had spent years chiseling her down. For a long moment, I just watched her. The way she smiled politely at customers. The way her hands trembled slightly when she poured coffee. When she finally turned and saw me, the cup she was holding slipped. It shattered on the tiled floor, and so did the silence between us. "Lucas," she whispered. My name sounded like a ghost's name on her lips. I stood there, unsure if I should walk away or let her speak. But she didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't even cry. She just said, I deserved everything that happened. And in that moment, all the anger I thought I still carried, the rage, the betrayal, the hatred, it didn't vanish, but it softened into something else. Pity, maybe. Or the sad understanding that we were both just casualties of choices we couldn't take back. I paid for my coffee, left a generous tip, and walked out without another word. That night, I went home and stood by the window of my apartment, watching the city lights blur into a sea of color. Somewhere out there, Donald was counting days on a prison wall. Sophia was serving coffee to strangers. And I, the man who had, couldn't remember the last time I'd slept peacefully. I had built my revenge perfectly, but I hadn't built a life after it. Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I had chosen silence instead of strategy, distance instead of destruction. Maybe the hurt would have healed slower, but at least I'd still recognize myself. Now, when people ask why I live alone in a penthouse that echoes with emptiness, I tell them this. Because peace isn't always what you gain when the war ends, sometimes it's just what's left when everyone else has lost.